Hello, everyone, and welcome to podcast number 2 for the Everlast Adventures. And I am Dane, your host, and I'm joined by the creator and Fate Weaver of Everlast, Kyle.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm excited to be here for episode 2.
Yeah, so for those of you who have been keeping track on our normal channel, as well as just all of our social medias and stuff, you know that this is our take 2 for our podcast. Unfortunately, we had some technical issues with the first one, but hopefully we can be a little bit more concise and make things a little bit quicker for this one. So I guess just to get right into it without further ado, so this specific podcast will be covering sessions 2 and sessions 3 of Everlast Adventures. And a lot of things happened. A lot of things happened. So we'll be talking about some of the gameplay mechanics. We'll be talking about, of course, things that happened in the game. And we'll also be, of course, answering your guys' questions as well.
Really good and fun questions, you guys. So keep bringing them. It's great to be able to interact with you guys outside of just the regular stream of Everlast.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, again, Kyle, if you want to give a quick little explanation of the purpose of this podcast, this is episode 2 of Everlast Adventures, so we're still very much new to this. So, why do we do it?
Absolutely. So this is going to be your guys' look at kind of the behind the scenes of the creation of Everlast as a game, especially behind the scenes of the adventure itself of Eklos Eos. And again, as Dane had mentioned, we'll be going over just brief story stuff, but also gameplay mechanics of Everlast. One of the things that I feel is really important is not to bog the adventure down on the live streams of Eklos Eos.
Agreed.
With gameplay mechanics, rules, that kind of stuff. We have separate conversations with the players behind the scenes, but this is our way to kind of explain to you guys as viewers what's going on, especially because this is not a game that has officially been released yet. This is your guys' opportunity and our way to be able to kind of just talk to you about how Everlast works. Talk about not just gameplay mechanics, but lore, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and Kyle, speaking on this game not being released, let's go over some disclaimer stuff as we're talking about it.
Yes, absolutely. So, one thing to note, because this game has not been released, it is actually copywritten under Kyle LaFont and Fantasy Forge Studios for our creation of it. So don't take anything such as music, sounds, videos, ideas, any kind of intellectual property, visuals, whatever the case, and claim it as your own, because we have quite a few ways of being able to prove that it is not yours. And so this is something that has been my baby for years in the making, and something that I want to bring to you guys, and I don't necessarily want it to be warped or perverted in any way before it gets brought out to the audience. A big reason why we're bringing this to you guys early is to not only build up hype for the game, but for you guys to be able to enjoy the game pre-release, and so you're not super behind on, what is Everlast? So don't take any of that. That being said, feel free to use it for any homebrew stuff that you're doing, but again, don't claim it as your own, essentially.
Exactly. And so, I mean, that's part of the reason why we are sticking to our guns. We're not going through a publisher or publishing this game ourselves. So we're going to be very, very protective of it. We're taking all the necessary measures in order for us to protect it. And I guess we'll get all of that out of the way, so we don't have to worry about that. But now let's get into it. So let's talk a little bit about sessions 2 and 3 of Everlast Adventures. So Kyle, if you want to give like a very, very quick little synopsis for those who may have missed the adventures and what did ensue. However, I do want to say, if you have not listened back to them, they're 2.5 hours. They're not very long. Maybe that'd be a good idea to watch and listen to those before you. They
might be long for a YouTube video, but for a live stream D&D session, not very long. So
yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, that's probably the best thing you can do to get the best recap possible. But Kyle, if you want to give just a short little one really quick.
Yes, absolutely. So the party Eklos Eos, they are currently on an island called Aishan Island. It's the largest of an island chain of the Aishan archipelago. And the group of Eklos Eos came there for vacation, essentially. And during their time in the Aishan Archipelago on Aishan Island, they found themselves in Takai Town. It is a town that is pretty much a vacation destination. And when they arrived was right before this big festival called the Celebration of Solstice. And so the group themselves, they were vacationing, doing their kinds of that kind of stuff until they were approached to be able to join kind of the city watch. There's been some unsavory figures. There's been individuals disappearing, especially as more and more visitors come for this celebration. And so they were going around interviewing all kinds of people, which is where we come into session 2. And immediately, the celebration of solstice began with a fireworks festival, and there was someone who went screaming in the crowd. So Ekos come into the rescue, trying to figure out what is going on. As it turns out, one of the NPCs that they had spoke with earlier, an old woman, had something stolen from her, a piece of paper, something that she claims to be one of her most prized possessions. And it was stolen by someone in a red bandana. And so the party of Ekos chasing after them before he vanished in the jungle. So there was a big chase sequence and everything that happened there. But then Ekos, in hot pursuit, went into the jungle, eventually finding themselves face to face with the threats of the jungle. Whether it's the humidity, the weariness that they get from just travel in general. And this was actually the very first opportunity for Ekos to be able, and actually this party, to use the new adventuring rules with the adventuring travel rules.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later on today.
Yeah. And eventually they come across a bandit camp. And so feigning distress, Luxalia and Yuki go into the middle of this bandit camp to where it all hits the fan. And battle ensues, and essentially that was episode 2. And at the end of it, they spared the lives of 3 bandits, 3 individual bandits. To which they tied them up, looted around, got some stuff, and then Luxalia, Belbin, and Yuki went into hot pursuit of this man who is called the captain of the group. The man wearing the bandana, who they have discovered is Duluth, another NPC that they had come across actually at Takai Town. And so they eventually ran off chasing him, again, dealing with the jungle itself. That's one thing that's really important about the adventuring phase in Everlast. It's one of the things that I really think gets skipped over in most RPGs, especially like tabletop RPGs, is this idea of like what happens on the road. If you think about it, like think of like Lord of the Rings. Like the vast majority of those books are the people on the road encountering things on the road.
Exactly.
And so it's kind of, I wanted to be able to implement rules that are very similar and kind of give you that sense, that feel, that sense of desperation. And obviously, as the players learn these mechanics, it'll be improved upon, all that kind of fun stuff. But anyways, they laid down camp for the night to where they realized, wow, they were 5 minutes away from where their final destination was. However, after a series of investigations going through the ringer as far as traps goes, that kind of stuff in this jungle, they were able to open up a cliff face where they were revealed with a jungle troll horde, to which they grabbed all kinds of loot and fun stuff until the jungle troll appeared, and they found Duluth's headband on the floor in this cave. And the 3 of them, Belbin, Luxalia, and Yuki, decided to hide. To which, unfortunately, due to a really bad stealth roll, Luxalia alerted this jungle troll to the presence, and that's where it ended. Was right before a combat encounter with a jungle troll.
Yes. And so I feel like not a lot happened within the last 2 sessions, but it was very roleplay heavy. Again, I highly recommend going back and listening to sessions 2 and 3 if you have not. Again, that was just a very brief explanation, but very well done, I might add.
Thank you.
But we have a couple things that we do want to talk about considering sessions 2 and 3, however. And the first I guess part of it is you implemented a new kind of rule system to I mean, it's an Everlast rule system, but it's the first time we've really used it. And it's the difference between the adventuring phase and the holiday phase. And so, because again, there's not really anything like this in D&D, that is. When you go on an adventure, you go on an adventure, but they're two actual phases. So can you explain those just a little bit for us, Kyle? Maybe,
Sure,
maybe
and I
starting with the adventure, or maybe starting with the holiday phase, because that's where we were starting.
Right,
we were on the
absolutely.
holiday phase.
And I'll kind of relate this back to D&D, since I'm sure that's the system that people are most familiar with. So in D&D, you have short rests and long rests, which, depending on how you play, whatever homebrew rules that you do, the typical rules is a long rest is when you complete 8 hours of sleep. A short rest is usually like a 2-hour break where basically you expend hit dice and like this kind of stuff. In Everlast, the two phases you have are the holiday phase and the adventuring phase, essentially. The holiday phase is going to be your long rest. And so during the adventure, you have less opportunity to completely heal up and do those types of things during your normal night's sleep. Those are more going to be equivalent to your short rest on the adventure. But during the holiday phase, it's a small little break, a small little vacation. It doesn't matter who you are in Everlast, whether you are a champion selected by the Serac. You need a vacation. Like, your body is human, your body is mortal, and you're going to need to take a little bit of a break from the adventure. And so it's broken up into these holiday phases, which can last anywhere from 2 weeks all the way up to like 7 months. And so each holiday phase that you have is a set number of time in the player's manual in the adventure that is going to be released. And you have like basically holiday actions that encompass 2 weeks. So if you took a 2-week holiday, you have one holiday action to be able to complete during that time, to which you are able to heal up and everything, plus one additional action with things such as like you can go shopping, you can work, you can go to the local adventurers guild and potentially get some nice loot or that kind of stuff. You could do all kinds of things during your one action, or if it is longer, multiple actions during your holiday phase.
And yeah, I think that's very, very realistic in a way, because one thing I really appreciate about Everlast itself is, as you mentioned before, the characters are human. I mean, human as in like we have Draken and elves, that kind of stuff. Mortal. They're not like these ridiculously overpowered creatures where I feel like D&D kind of becomes, especially level 10 and above for D&D, like characters become pretty much untouchable. You could probably get away with anything, and that's not the case with Everlast.
And it's not fun for dungeon masters a lot of the time too, especially if you do have a table of a bunch of murder hobos. Where pretty much, because they're so high powered, because they have all of these characteristics, they start to write the game itself, and it kind of gets out of the hands of the DM. Where in Everlast, that's not so much the case. Like you said, Dane, it is a very realistic look about, they are mortals and they have to actually prepare to go on journeys.
Exactly. And I guess that's a great transition into the adventuring phase itself. And oh boy, did we get introduced to the adventuring phase. I feel like this jungle of Aishan Island literally is the perfect environment to put us into, because we right away started feeling those effects of even just 1-2 days of travel, especially in session 3, which we'll talk a little bit about.
Absolutely. Yeah, the adventuring phase is the second phase of the game. It's 2 of 3. So the third one is battle, which is kind of its own separate thing, but there's also dungeons and stuff that have their own set of rules, but all of those happen within the adventure phase of the game. And what ends up happening is at the very beginning of the adventure, how it's supposed to be planned out is this one was really quick. They just jumped right into the jungle and had to decide travel rules. There are these 4 roles that players have to take, which are the Wayfinder, the Tracker, the Hearthbinder, and the Watchman. And so there's different roles that each party member has to take. If there are any leftover roles, those leftover roles become Watchmen, etc. All that kind of fun stuff. And they have to make specific type of travel rule checks. in order to progress from one place to another. And so, for example, the Wayfinder, they're in charge of making progress checks, like their initial rolls as they begin their adventure, and that kind of stuff. And what that does is it determines things like the weather, what's going to happen, environmental encounters, actual combat encounters, that kind of stuff. And then you have the Tracker, which is in charge of things like hunting, which is great to be able to get food, for the party to be able to eat, to not gain points of weariness, which is somewhat equivalent to exhaustion in D&D. And they also are in charge of scouting, using stealth checks and that kind of stuff to kind of see what's around the general vicinity of the party. And also track things, so actually make their way through. And like, for example, they're following Duluth, this bandit, tracking this bandit through this dense jungle. And then the Hearthbinder, what they do is they're in charge of basically everything that has to do with setting up camp, such as supplies checks, such as interacting with NPCs that they might find on the road or that kind of stuff. And they're actually allowed additional actions to do during the rest, like a rest on the road. And then the final one is the Watchman, which basically what ends up happening is we did an elongated version of this during the sessions because, again, roleplay is really fun. It's really entertaining. It's a good way for the party members to be able to get comfortable with each other, be able to really immerse themselves in the environment.
Well, especially being our first time doing this all. Like, I think it was a really good opportunity for us to actually, like, interact with this new rule set.
Exactly. And so essentially what ends up happening is when every player finishes their rest, they go into their sleeping phase. And so they determine lookouts or from the Watchmen and that kind of stuff. So everyone determines their basically lookout. And so they make basically like a lookout check. And then at the very end of it, the person who is assigned Watchman, if there are multiple, you can choose which Watchman, makes a final check. And that final check, which is further modified by the other lookout checks, is basically it determines any encounters or anything that happens during the night of sleep, essentially. And if they're able to get through it safe and sound, then that's good, and then they're able to go on to the next day. But essentially what happens is this repeats until the party gets from where they began all the way to the very end. And again, during that, combat encounters are in between. There's things called dungeons, which allows them to be able to kind of like take a sidestep from the main adventure, or it could be tied into the main adventure, as it were. Yeah. And basically that's like good opportunities to be able to find things like treasure items, that kind of stuff. So it kind of separates from the journey itself to a degree.
So with this forest or jungle troll encounter that we're on, is this technically a dungeon or not really? Like mini dungeon?
It is as many of a dungeon as you can, because a lot of the times,
1 room, 2 rooms.
Yeah, a couple rooms in most of the dungeons. And I actually do include like the forest or the jungle just outside as part of the dungeon. Being able to interact with things like obstacles and traps and that kind of stuff. But typically there are combat encounters, and the way that is there's a certain initiative, you can do certain things on your turns, that kind of stuff, and then combat encounter ensues, and then that kind of stuff happens. And usually at the end of a dungeon there's some kind of reward to some degree, whether it's a special treasure item, and some of it's dependent on how well you roll for different loot stuff, and some of it's dependent on like what you actually face at the very end of the dungeon.
That makes tons of sense. And one other question I have about the adventuring phase itself. So you're talking about the 4 different roles you could potentially choose. And so again, I feel like our party was really well set up for it. But there's specific characters who really seem to fit specific roles really, really well. For example, we have Dane, right? And I feel like in battle, he's fine, but he's definitely built more for the adventuring phase, I feel like, and his specific role. If it wasn't for him and him having these massive modifiers because his character's built for it, I don't know if we would have even found the bandit camp. We might have just gotten lost and had to make our way back. And
it would have been rough. And you guys actually felt that in session 3 because Jonathan wasn't there to play Dane. I just left him at the bandit camp. And so with Belvin and Luxalia and Yuki trying to find their way through, like, yeah, they were suffering a little bit. So Thordane himself, points of weariness, all that kind of stuff. And with Thordane being a support character, not all support characters are going to be built like Luxalia, for example, that is just like an intense healer. That literally, like, that's one of her primary roles, is just keeping everyone alive. Thordane has a tiny bit of that, but where his support abilities come in is during the adventuring phase. So he actually can fit pretty much every role equally. So where he basically is like a Swiss Army knife, you can put him in whatever role that you want, like travel role, and he'll be good at it for the most part. I would say maybe with the exception of Hearthbinder to a degree, but I think he would be really good at the vast majority of any of the other roles, especially the Wayfinder. He'd be really good with that, and the Tracker. I think he would be really good there too.
And I mean, obviously, we truly did miss him. We as we mentioned before, by the end of session 3, we got 2 points of weariness, which is unfortunate because it really affects our rolls. I'm actually really nervous for this battle with this troll, because it affects our rolls basically every point of weariness that we do get.
Well, again, that's on the weariness factor. I guess it's kind of similar in D&D with exhaustion. Exhaustion doesn't play a whole lot depending on how you play your campaign. If you're going based off of normal rules, you don't have a lot of opportunities to like be affected by exhaustion because you take a long rest at the end of the day. And the way that like this exhaustion works is it doesn't matter like what level you are, like whether you're level 1 or level 10. Like it's going to affect you as a player. Like again, you are mortal creatures as you're making your way through this. And again, with this jungle, this oppressive, humid environment that they're completely lost in, it's very oppressive. And so what that does is during this journey phase, you can tell that the environment's having impact on their actual physical well-being. And so yes, while they're level 7 in this adventure, they're not going to be rolling like they're level 7 because everything has a -2 modifier to it at this point.
And how many times did we roll a nat 1? I'm pretty sure Yuki herself, I mean, I'd have to go back and verify, at least 2 or 3 times. She got
I'm pretty sure on session 3, the party themselves either rolled a natural 1 or below a natural 1. I think between Belvin, Yuki, and Luxalia,
it was ridiculous.
6 times. It's maybe 7.
It was ridiculous. I know myself, like I don't think I actually rolled a natural 1, but because of the weariness that we incurred, all of my rolls were at a -2, right? To the roll. So it's not to the modifier, it's to the roll. Meaning I rolled a 3, meaning it went to a 1, which is a natural 1. And I think Luxalia rolled like a natural 2 and went down to like a -1, which obviously, or a 0, I guess, which would be whatever it would be. Kind of thing. Still critical fail kind of thing. And I don't know, even talking to Connor, he said that he didn't even roll a crit the entire time, and we did tons of rolls. So yeah, we were all rolling really poorly, and it didn't help having that weariness. So definitely makes you feel immortal, or mortal, I should say, not immortal, for sure. And
for sure.
It was great. It was awesome. I mean, it was difficult, of course, but it was really fun.
Well, and again, something like this jungle troll encounter, which, like, based on like the levels, and again, not too many spoilers for Dane, for Yuki, but this should be an encounter at level 7. That isn't necessarily a piece of cake, but should be relatively easy. With the 2 points of weariness,
makes it a little bit more difficult.
It's gonna throw a lot of stuff up in the air.
Well, we'll see. Luckily, we do have our healer with us, which is nice.
That is currently being in pursuit right now.
And two DPS, I will say too. So again, we mentioned it in our podcast 1, but how Everlast, there's a big difference between, say, D&D, where one specific character fits a specific role. For example, Yuki, she's a bard, and typically in D&D, they're the jack of all trades, right? They can do anything, but they're not really great at one thing.
They're not a master at one thing, but they're pretty good at everything.
Whereas the thing that's great about Everlast is each I don't know. How do you explain it? Each patronage? What are
Each
they?
patronage,
Yeah.
yes, has like their own set things. So, for example, Luxalia as a mana sworn and Yuki as a bard, what they do is they have like a certain amount of things that everyone in that patronage gets, and then once they hit level 5, they branch into a specific path.
Yeah.
And so these paths are divided into physical attackers, elemental attackers, supporter characters, and defender characters. And so the way I actually took a lot of inspiration from your typical like JRPGs, RPGs, especially like things like Final Fantasy 14. Big influence where you have like this party that's made up of basically 2 DPS, a support character, and a tank to be able to like fit these roles. And I really tried to make a system to be able to implement that where it not only runs smoothly, but like, so tanks, for example, as Zill being his character, can grab the attention of enemies, provoke them, and be able to like, his purpose is to keep them on him. And so he doesn't just feel like an underwhelming attacker where it's like he's built to be a brick house, and he's like, most of like the defender traits and arts are pretty much like self-preservation and also like grabbing attention, where attackers, obviously, they get more attacks. So Belvin and Yuki right now have 2 attacks each, where pretty much Thor, Dane, Luxalia, and Zill right now only have 1 attack.
But they got more support actions they can do.
Correct. So they have more support actions. So they have 2 support actions where Belvin and Yuki only have their 1 support action. So there's lots of things that they do to be able to help. But as you noticed in episode 2 of the adventures and in Everlast, is the Yuki was putting out insane amounts of damage. That's what she does, though.
Receiving
that's her job. Yeah, she was receiving it, but that was her job. Where we saw Zill, he was able to attract the attention of a lot of the enemies, pulling a lot of the fire off of a lot of the party members, which, again, at the very beginning of that encounter, Yuki was pretty much getting pummeled at that point. Luxalia, you saw her healing. Again, we saw Thordane where he really excelled in, I mean, he's kind of a attacker. He's like a supporty attacker when he's in combat, but where you saw him really excel with his support was when he was helping track through the jungle.
Yes.
And then Belvin, again, was just dealing damage as well. He wasn't doing as much because I was playing him, and that's what happens when players are gone. They don't get to use the full extent of what their characters do.
Well, luckily, hopefully within the next couple weeks, again, I guess a small little plug for our next session 4 will actually be June 11th. I believe it's a Saturday. And
Correct.
So hopefully we have everyone. I mean, we haven't had anyone, but again, spring's a very busy time for everyone. Everyone's married, everyone has families, that kind of stuff. So we're very understanding of that. And even Max, who plays Zill, he was doing seminary as well. And because of that, we didn't necessarily know. We didn't have any communication outside of Cole, who happened to work
at the
seminary close to him, kind of thing. So it was kind of all over the place to start with, but hopefully things start calming down a little bit more and we can really get into the rut of it and we don't have to worry about that too much. But I think that's the wonderful thing about also still having our streams, our normal streams, even if we don't have players, because again, not everyone can make it, and that shouldn't be a reason for us to not play, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. But and that's one of the big things that as a Fate Weaver I want to be able to do, is this is essentially a game to play for fun. It's supposed to be fun for the players, and if they feel like, oh my gosh, and this is just my play style, but if they feel, oh my gosh, like my DM keeps getting all over me for now, but I've got a really busy life, and like it starts to really grade on I think the party dynamic as a whole. I can't tell you the amount of like games that have fallen apart that, you know, I've been a part of that's kind of been the case. Like I know that there's 2 that I can think of where like people like stopped coming. Granted, I'm pretty good about reaching out and doing stuff, but as the DM, like pretty much he's the most important person, he or she is the most important person to actually be there. I mean, you can have the game if anyone else isn't there, but if the DM's not available, that's kind of what breaks parties. And the nice thing is I'm kind of forever DM for this group, so I don't think they have to worry about the party falling apart.
I appreciate it. Well, I mean, hey, you're putting all of your effort into this game, and we very, very much appreciate it. So we actually
it's lots
have
of
a leg
fun.
up. Yeah, we have a leg up on it, I think, compared to most groups. But yeah, no, that's great, and I do really like that because I feel like a lot of, especially streamed Dungeons and Dragons, Tabletop RPG, a lot of it is almost just for like entertainment purposes for the people who are viewing it, which at the same time we want it to be entertaining, but we're also here to have fun and play it as well. So
Yeah,
I
exactly.
definitely like how we just have very much this is a home game, and it feels like a home game. It doesn't feel like we're having to put on an extra face because we're streaming, and I love that. I think it's awesome. But I guess we'll talk about, we have two more things that I do want to get to before we start getting to our questions. And one of them kind of is to talk about the fact that we are mortal, and the characters of Everlast themselves, the adventurers, the heroes, have accountability, and because they are human, they definitely have that, and we saw that multiple times throughout these last two sessions in the fates checks. So fate check is also another new system that you added to Everlast, and it's I think really grounds the party. And if you want to explain a little bit about that, I know there were a few opportunities in which we did see them in sessions 2 and 3.
Yeah, absolutely. And so essentially what that is there's a system in Everlast called Virtue and Vice. Where this actually got brought up is the murder hoboism. I noticed that becomes super rampant in these types of games, and I get it. Like, a D&D game is very much escapism, and even if you're not some crazy lunatic in real life, like, it's kind of sometimes fun to go and play a crazy lunatic, like on the D&D table.
Connor. Belbin.
It's true, Belbin. Yeah, he is not that kind of person in real life.
No. Connor does such a good job of just like flipping a switch when he becomes Belbin, because they're literally the complete opposite people. He's like the kindest, sweetest, selfless person you can imagine, but when he gets into Belbin, oh boy, he gets into Belbin.
Exactly. And so this Virtue and Vice system was a way to kind of pull it away from that, because I think it works in D&D, the murder hoboism, is because like every adventurer that is built, like they're built on like a scale from like, I don't know, it's like being like virtuous in Everlast terms to being very viceful. So like you could have someone who is like a like lawful good, or you could have someone who's like chaotic evil, and they're like part of the party together. It's kind of strange, and like I don't know, like for me, I've always kind of felt like it's kind of just like a weird like party mechanic, always having like that. Or you can have entire parties that they're the heroes of the game, but they're just honestly the villains of the game.
Yes.
In Everlast, all of these characters that you play, every single adventure, they're part of the free peoples of Everlast, and they're all inherently good. And so, yes, it's kind of based off of like our own kind of play as people, is we're fallen people, but we're just good creations of God. Yeah. And we're here to be able to fight for what is good for our God.
Exactly.
And so these players that become champions, they go through these things called fate checks, and they're different kinds of things can trigger them. Whether it's a bad thing. So for example, if someone physically does something, like I think a good example is looking at what happened with Yuki and Luxalia in episode 2, where they went in there with like a not very well like discussed plan, and feigning that Luxalia was hurt. And so they didn't really have a plan to be able to talk about this. And so what ends up happening is Yuki just hands over Luxalia. And so I have both of them make fate skill checks. On basically a success, they receive fewer points of misery. On a failure, they receive more points of misery. Yeah. Essentially what that's supposed to reflect is basically Yuki giving over Luxalia, her friends, to unsavory folk, and then Luxalia on the other end feeling this sense of betrayal from someone that she deems a friend. Yeah. These things are also triggered on things like your fears. So like if you see something like, for example, like a giant spider, someone has a fear of giant spiders. If they come across a giant spider, they're going to have to make a face check based off of that.
Is that
And
Dane who has the giant spider fear?
I,
Someone has a
I
giant
think
spider
so.
fear, I think.
I
I
think
don't
it
know.
might be Thordane. I think it might be Thordane,
Yeah.
but like fear of giant spiders.
Yeah.
Or, for example, on the other hand, for a good thing, if there's something that is a sense of hope to someone, a sense of really good character like growth, something that they aspire to be, they can make a fate check if they're either role play to that, or have that where they can actually remove points of misery from those things. And so the way that every player is they have a scale of these things called misery. They're points that are equal to their faith score, just total.
So
and so
for
like
example,
that can range.
for example, Yuki's is 9. So her entire faith score is a 9, and that's split between her piety modifier and her what's the other one?
Her piety and
faith. In focus. And so if she gets 9 points of misery, then it adds a point of vice, basically, and then
so she can hold up to 9 points of misery, and then if she gets the 10th point, it adds a point of vice, and then she starts over from 0,
but
and then it builds up. Yeah, with 1 vice. And then what that does is, if you fall into vice, if you roll like critically fail on like a fates check, then you go into fits of madness essentially. Which is depending on up to 3 points or up to 4 points technically of vice. If you get to 4 points of vice, like the extreme end of that, you go into a fit of madness. Chances are something bad is going to really happen. So I think a good example of this is Gollum in Lord of the Rings. He was completely overcome by the power of the ring and the temptation of the ring and everything that had drew him to it, to where he went nuts and literally ran off and secluded himself in like Middle Earth all by himself. No one knew what happened to him. And he was just so obsessed over this thing. So something like that could happen. They can find that the character has unfortunately met an unfortunate end, or all the way to the point where it's like this person has been so overcome by the horrors that they've seen that they can no longer adventure, and they've retired from it forever. And so essentially, if you get bad enough to certain points of vice and you roll critically failing in certain categories, your adventure's done. It's as if your character has died. And so you have to make a new character and everything for that. On the other hand, you can get up to 1 point of virtue. So you start in the middle at this neutral state. You can fall into vice, or you can go into points of virtue. And what that does is it gives you just like small bonuses. And that goes all the way up to like 0 points of misery, virtue +1.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I really like about that, as opposed to like say the Dungeons and Dragons arbitrary like scale, like 9-point scale of like lawful, good, and neutral and evil kind of thing. What I like about this is it really matches how people actually are, right? Again, like as you mentioned, no one like is inherently evil. Like all the heroes are creations of Alumnia, so they do start somewhere, but they also have the free will to be able to make that decision of what they do with their selves. So yes, we may be making more fates checks, and this is definitely more of an important part to Everlast itself than it was in D&D. I know a lot of D&D campaigns and stuff, some people don't even touch their like alignment, if that makes sense.
Well, and one thing that I really love is, so in Adventures of Middle Earth, which is a D&D 5e supplement, they have this thing called shadow points, which is kind of similar. I guess the end result is kind of similar, where it's like you pretty much lose your character, but it's kind of like the same thing. Like your adventure, like you're as an adventurer in Middle Earth, like you're supposed to be a good person fighting against the evil forces of Sauron. That makes sense. Like you're not going to be playing like an orc Urukai captain, like that's trying to kill Sauron. It just it doesn't make sense. So like it's very much a way to be able to I mean, in Everlast, like they're more frequent than Shadow Points rolls, and like they're for different things. And there's actually like opportunities to be able to remove points of misery and that kind of stuff. But yeah, absolutely, it's a way to be able to really bring to like humanity to these characters of free will and allow them to be tempted, and like, you know, their actual actions and roles, you know, determine like how their mental and you know, souls become.
Well, I also think it's a great way for the players and the Fate Weaver themselves to really get to bond over each other's characters, I think, because, again, there's specific rules that are going to be made for Fate checks that don't necessarily pertain to anyone else in the party, right? And by letting your Fate Weaver know, like, these are the kind of things that I see in my character, the Fate Weaver can model these fate checks depending on what happens and stuff. Yes, it's I think a little bit of extra ownage on the Fate Weaver themselves, but I feel like there's a lot of times in D&D in particular where like a player has something in mind, they don't necessarily share it with the DM, and then it's just chaos. Like just chaos ensues and the DM doesn't know what's happening. Whereas this allows for good conversation with the Fate Weaver and the player to be.
Well, it allows the Fate Weaver to be able to craft a story around their players too.
Exactly.
So they can take whatever's in these adventures, whatever in these source books, and be able to take that and then create a environment, a world where these characters really feel a part of it, where every decision they make actually makes a difference and an impact on the world as a whole and their characters as well.
Exactly. Well, I mean, you were talking about specifically Luxalia and Yuki, and for what were Yuki and Luxalia, and for that specific instance, I think I succeeded, but because it was a bad deed and was maybe a little bit dubious, Yuki doesn't typically do things like that as far as like that rash. I still got points of misery, and I mean, Luxalia, I don't know necessarily her past or anything like that, but she got stuff as well. But then we ended up saving some bandits at the end, which for Yuki at the very least, since she passed it, it kind of reset those points. So she gained a point of misery, but then she ended up removing that point of misery by actually showing mercy on the bandits themselves. So it is constant.
At the very end of that combat, I think it is one of those things where, especially in like a game like D&D, it's like the goal is to wipe out all of the enemies.
Yeah.
Where again, like even these people who are bandits, they're people. They have free will too, but they were asking for mercy.
Yeah. They gave up. They dropped everything. Yeah. So
exactly.
And who was it? It was Thordane actually who made the final decision. I know Yuki in particular was really against not killing them, I guess. But then Belbin and Luxalia were just in. I think it could have gone either way. Left to Belbin's own devices, he would probably dispatch anyone, to be quite honest. But that's why the party grounds him quite nicely.
But here's the thing too, like there's also benefits and you know, maybe not so many benefits to being able to, for example, keep these people alive. Because the party could have done a number of things. They decided to tie them up, interrogate them a little bit, and do their thing. What they do with them after, I have no idea what they plan on doing. If they let the bandits escape, they could, you know, stop their life of thievery and banditry because of the close call of death, or they could go report to a bigger, badder person. And so, like when the party goes to try to do something greater as part of the main story, the villains are already there, prepared for the party, and so it makes it more difficult for the party. So yes, while they like lose points of misery and on one hand for doing something good, it's a very rational and realistic that they could be betrayed and like backstabbed essentially for doing these good deeds.
Exactly.
But it really brings it back to, it's like, why are they doing these good deeds?
Of course, yeah.
You know, like that's the whole thing.
Yeah,
is you want to be a smart person, but you want to be a really good person, because again, you don't want to fall into points of vice, because then it just becomes really bad and your player struggles. But ultimately what it's supposed to be is like, especially with the free peoples of Everlast, you want to be merciful, but you also have to walk that fine line of being merciful and also just.
Yeah, I agree. And definitely with these bandits, at least Yuki's thought process behind it is they're definitely just following some dude who they're making a living. They're just trying to make a living. They don't seem to be like for example, people from the town of Rogue, or under the guise of Shalazar or whatever, something like that. Like really bad people. Doesn't seem to be like that. It just seems to be treasure hoard, but we'll see if it bites us later on. But another way that you can get points of misery or vice is by nightmares too. So I know, again, sleeping is an important thing, obviously, on the adventure, and we have the opportunity to get nightmares. So can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, again, sleep is very important. And depending on what ends up happening with certain rolls that happen, whether they're travel rolls or things that, as a Fate Weaver, I just roll during, or whatever situation, if they've had contact with something that's like evil, if they've had contact with void energy, whatever, there's a slew of different things that could lead to something which is nightmares. For example, in this case, with this like dark oppressive jungle, points of weariness, like that breeds itself or lends itself to breeding nightmares, whether it's fear of the jungle or something a little bit more sinister. What basically essentially happens is I have them roll like these checks, and if they pass them, then they're good and they're able to sleep fully through the night without issues. Or they can gain nightmares, whether it is something that happened during the day that allows them to not sleep very well, and then it reduces the amount of HP that they're able to recover, or if any at all, depending on the severity of the nightmare. Or it could even be things from like experiencing like evil visions from some kind of wicked magic that's happening, some kind of void energy, whatever the case. Either way, whether they suffer for it or not, whether they pass their check, essentially, they will be making fates rolls regardless. And so if they fail their fates roll, they gain points of misery. If they don't fail, obviously nothing happens, so they don't gain points of misery.
Yeah, actually, I like the fact that nightmares can be a thing, because there's times, and actually Friday was one of those days for me where like you have a dream, even if you can't necessarily remember it, but you wake up feeling like super weird and odd, like in real life, right? Not just in Everlast, but you wake up feeling super odd, and it really like affects your day, like ahead of you and stuff. And so I felt like on Friday, waking up Friday morning, I almost made a fate and it wasn't for the best. I had just a weird feeling about me all Friday, just waking up, even though I'm in a familiar place with familiar things. I don't remember my dream necessarily, but I just woke up feeling odd and strange. And so it's true. It feels real, and I love it. I think it's a wonderful thing about Everlast. So yeah, it's definitely really good. But I guess that's the last thing we'll talk about for sessions 2 and 3. Again, there wasn't too much actual story that happened, so I'm glad we were able to explain some of the important gameplay mechanics and some of the decisions the characters made. But I want to leave us some question, or it's time for question time. So let's get right into the questions. So I have them pulled up. Kyle,
so do I.
If you have them pulled up, great. So I guess we'll just alternate. So I'll go first, and then you can go, and then we'll just go back and forth based off of that. Perfect. So we got tons of questions, which is great, and most of them are by our good buddies and very well devoted moderators to our wonderful Fantasy Forge Studios Twitch channel, the Numerable Whom and OMG Cole. And so they did wonderful, amazing questions. Again, if anyone has any questions that you do want to submit in the future, they can be regarding any of the sessions that we did, in particular the ones that we had for the month, as well as just things about us and things about the characters themselves. As you see, these questions cover a wide variety of topics, and so we'll just get right into it, I guess. So the first one is, how did Zill learn blacksmithing? And that one is by the Numerable Whom. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I actually didn't know the answer to this question at all until I actually had a conversation with Kyle about this. So Kyle, maybe you take this one away.
Absolutely. So actually, when the party first met Zill, so he was actually the newest addition to the party of Everlast. And when they first met him in the town of Helix, he was just a guy that appeared during a big fight that happened in the city. And then he just ended up getting clumped in with the group and all this kind of stuff. But one of the things that he actually had briefly mentioned to the party, kind of as like a side fact, was the fact that he was an orphan. So he lived in, he's younger, he's like just reaching adulthood at that point, but he felt very compelled to be able to protect those who were also orphans on the street, particularly younger kids. And so in order to support them, he actually took up blacksmithing from a young age from one of the local blacksmiths in Helix. And so he started doing that to bring home something for the kids to be able to survive as he kind of like took care of them. Fortunately, as he departed the group of Everlast, he was actually able to kind of get it in with the guards a little bit for saving the town to be able to take care of these kids that he was now leaving. And so hopefully these kids of Helix, these orphans, are in good hands. But that's how Zill learned blacksmithing, and since then he's been honing his art and improving his skills.
I'm gonna tell you, it's been really useful. Even before we implemented the entirely Everlast rules to it, oh my gosh, the amount of times like he just come in handy, and like in his holiday phases, being able to craft amazing stuff. I think he crafted what is it, tier 2 armor, Damascus armor for himself, and so he's real thick, real good.
He's a thick boy.
Also,
Chunky.
there's weapon durability in Everlast, which isn't a thing in D&D or Pathfinder or anything like that. And so because of that, every time you hit an enemy or you take damage on your own armor kind of thing, or you miss an enemy kind of thing. I mean, imagine you hit someone, but it chinks off armor. Your weapon's going to take some damage kind of thing, right? And so he's able to help with that.
Repair them. He can repair metal items. And so, like, for example, things like Luxalia's crook, he's not going to be able to help repair that. But he can repair the broadswords that Yuki uses.
Well, I need my armor to be repaired now after session 2. And maybe after session 4, who knows? But yes, no, it's definitely very, very handy. And yeah, he really, the one thing I really do appreciate about Max and him playing Zill, he's really interested in the actual gameplay mechanics of Everlast, and so he really takes advantage of it. And so it
and especially with the blacksmithing, I've been trying to figure out like a good way. It was way too complicated when I had originally made it, and it's not fun if there's like all these different kinds of like almost like mathematical equations that you have to go through.
It was a straight up JRPG, but like you had to do all the math yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So like in theory it was really cool, but I've been able to make it a little bit more simple. But with, for example, with Max, with Zill, being able to actually know what his background does and utilize the effects of it to the best degree, essentially.
I think it's great. So, yep, that's how he learned blacksmithing. I didn't know this, but I'm glad that we reviewed it. So, Kyle, question 2.
What is Yuki's favorite musical instrument?
This is a great question. Numerable Whom is the one who submitted this question again. So Yuki likes instruments. Actually, I guess it's not that much a spoiler. It's new for you guys, but the whole party knows this. Yuki actually comes from a famous family of instrument makers from the town of Flamongolith, way up north in the Ravinian Peaks. And she obviously isn't with her family and stuff anymore. So she's grown up around instruments, and she's musically inclined that way, but her favorite instrument has always been a hand harp, in particular the lutes, right? So not one of those massive harps that have like a bajillion strings. I think the one that she uses is a 12-string harp. Might be less, I don't know what it is, but she uses her hand harp for pretty much everything, and it's very useful too, because she can use incantations, she can sing, she can speak. So I guess her voice is her second favorite thing. She's a big singer. She loves to sing. And so, yeah, it's pretty good. She likes the hand harp.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so I guess enough about that one. Next question. So, who does the most random things in the campaign, for example, keeps you guys on your toes? And that is courtesy of OMG Cole, that question.
Do you mind if I jump in?
Oh, go ahead.
So a couple of things. I would say we'll go. It's a scale. I would say the people who maybe do the least is, I would say, Thordane and Yuki are pretty even keeled. Like, as a Fate Weaver, I'm not super thrown off by them. Zill will sometimes, every now and then, throw, especially when it comes to like, what is the rule on this again? I'm like, oh geez, like I have to go back and like do that. Mostly because of that, because you know, again, Max really likes the actual rules and stuff. And then I would say roleplay wise, in completely opposite ways, people who throw a wrench in things are Luxalia and Belvin. So Cole and Connor, if you're listening to this, I will explain. They do a really amazing job of playing their characters on how their characters should
super
be.
well.
And that's the reason why they're very true to their characters. And I'm not saying everyone else isn't, but like the nature of their characters lend themselves to being very difficult to fate weave for. where, like, for example, you have Luxalia on one end. She has this checkered past, but she also is desperately trying to reach the equivalent of sainthood, guardianship in Everlast. And so she is, as a faithful person of Alamnia, and especially coming from basically being a training to be a shrine maiden, everything that she does is she's determining whether something's good or not. There was actually a point earlier on in the campaign, if you guys subscribe to the Patreon, eventually you'll get to be able to hear that, where she pretty much just let herself die. Just without fighting back. It was kind of like a David in the Lion's Den kind of thing, where she was there and she's like, I'm not going to fight whatever I'm going to fight. And there were two choices. It was like, you're going to fight something or you're going to die.
And she chose death.
He chose death. And I hate to say it, he was a little bit miffed at the end of that, or during that session, thinking Luxalia had died. And to be honest, I was very surprised that it ended up happening. I was like, you do realize if you don't do this, we're not going to play this out. You're just going to die. And he was just like, if that's what happens, that's what happens. And I'm like, all right. And then he died. Luxalia died. The point that he was trying to make, what I really loved is like, he appealed to it. It threw a wrench at things. So I'm like, I did not expect Luxalia to just like sacrifice herself. But the point that Luxalia was trying to make was this idea of kind of like pacifism, and you're not going to put yourself out there, like do something that like someone that's evil is forcing you to do. And I kind of understand that. And then so there was kind of like a little bit of like justification role-playing stuff that ended up happening where Luxalia is alive now, but certain things happen, and hopefully Luxalia has learned from that. On the other hand, Belbin straight up killed people like in the past, like literally murdering.
I tell you again, Belbin was a big reason I think that you really put in this Virtue and Vice system.
So thank you, Connor, for that. But yeah, he really was. Where it's just like they were leaving the town of Helix, and he just straight up murders a horse owner, like the stable owner,
just to get the horse to use, kind of thing.
Yeah, and it was just a pony. It wasn't even like a full horse, and he just rides off. And the party ended up having to pay the Helix City Guard like a hefty sum.
I'm pretty sure because Yuki used to keep all the party funds. She doesn't do too much of that anymore. But I'm pretty sure like it was like 3/4 of our party funds, and we had a ton of money. Like we got tons for saving Helix. In the way that we did, we had accrued quite a bit of wealth, and it was all gone. It pretty much all went away because of that.
Yep. So like something like that happened where these nonchalant NPCs that were there, and all of a sudden someone's getting murdered. So literally like Luxalia and Belbin on complete opposite ends. And then like, for example, like a party will be somewhere and Belbin will sneak off and do something. A party will be somewhere and Luxalia decides to stay back to do something. And it's just like, all right, like as a Fate Weaver, I have to be like, what is going on? Okay, keep track of what this person's doing, what NPCs they're involved with, like that kind of stuff. So they make it very difficult, but again, it's the nature of their characters that make it difficult, but it makes it fun.
It must be a Glyven thing.
Must be a Glyven thing. But it's like, I think for the players, like it keeps the game from becoming stale.
It's really fun. I agree.
You don't know like what certain individuals in your party are going to do, so it's just like you got it. It's very real life situations,
Sorry about it, Kyle, but not sorry.
It happens.
It's good. Imagine if you had a whole party of just chaotic Glyvens.
Well, then that's what would end up happening. You would get boring in the opposite. It's just like, I'm not surprised you're just killing people, blah, 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 stealing from these people. It's like, this game isn't fun for me anymore. Why are you even playing? Are you the good guys?
Yeah. Virtue and Vice. Love it.
Yeah.
So that's a great question. Kyle, do you want to take the next one?
Yes. Does Belbin ever act like a father figure, or is an immature adult?
This is a good
That's
question.
from OMG Cole.
That's a good question. Can I do my quick answer about it?
Yeah.
So how I feel about Belbin, and it's kind of how I feel about the Virtue and Vice system as well, is Belbin's not necessarily immature. I mean, he's Thordane's technically the oldest member of the party, but as far as like actual like equivalency of
physically.
years goes as far as like how long they live. Belbin is in his later years of life being a Glyvin.
Yes. He's in his 50s.
He's in his 50s. And Glyvins don't live too long. It's like similar-ish to humans.
Yeah, it's pretty much on par with how long humans live. So like into their 80s and 90s.
So yeah, he's past, basically he's for adventuring, he's past retirement, but he's just with us. And he definitely has had a past, for sure. He hasn't shared too much about his past. He's a pretty guarded Glyvin. But it has come up, actually. Shada, which we encountered recently, is, again, actually did know Belbin back in the day. And I don't know if it's necessarily the fact that he's an immature adult, or he's just a crankety, crotchety old Glyvin. I think
He's seen stuff.
Yeah, he's been shaped by life itself, so I'm not surprised by the things that he does, and he definitely is becoming a little bit more grounded the more that he's with the party. He was definitely a lot more chaotic back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
A lot more, but I don't know. I think he has a little bit of father figure to him, but it's really hard for him. It's really hard for him, I think, just to really take on that role as a father figure. But I think he is starting to like find that a little bit with the group.
Honestly, I feel like it comes from this place of spending a lot of his life alone. Oh boy.
Vorpal board.
Vorpal board. I think it has to do a little bit with starting his life alone. And doing a lot of the things alone, from his upbringing to like what his profession was to all this kind of stuff, until like becoming part of a party. So like the stuff that he does, yes, it is immature to the point where it's like he's not thinking of others, but he's never had to think of others and like the things that he's done. And so like I wouldn't necessarily say that. And like what we've seen, again, if you subscribe at the $10 level to the Patreon, you get access to the adventures before the actual stream stuff of Equaseos. You find out that he actually did know Shada, and to a degree, he was a father figure to Shada. I don't know if he's really a father figure to anyone in the party, but like to Shada, for sure, I would say he's for sure a father figure.
He's more like the creepy uncle to the party or something like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Not really a father figure. Yeah, I think that's a good answer for that. So the next question, actually, again from Cole, OMG Cole, what is the tier list in terms of power? Do you mind of the party? I'm assuming. Do you mind if I give my 2 cents on it? I don't have too much to say about it. I know you have more to say about it. So my long answer short, everyone is good at something, and some people are better at some things and some people are worse at some things. So everyone kind of works out to be similar, but or good, but in different things. So similar. It's hard to rank everyone, I guess.
That's one of the best non-answers I've ever heard, but also one of the true.
It's true. I mean, so for example, if you had to measure between Yuki and Belbin as far as physical DPS go, well, it's also really hard because we do different kinds of damage and different kinds of things. So Yuki, basically, since she's a dual wielder with a broadsword, she does a lot of slashing damage, but she can also add in different kinds of elemental damage. Whereas I think Belbin has the potential to do, I mean, I don't know his character too well, but
he uses a two-handed impact weapon, which is basically like pretty much brass knuckles that he like bare knuckle brawls with. But again, his weapon, it depends on equipment that people have, that kind of stuff. Like for example, Dane has a heroic weapon, which in D&D terms is a legendary weapon. He's not proficient with it yet, but like when he becomes proficient with it, he's got a freaking good weapon to use. There's all kinds of stuff that goes into it, but like the way that I design each and every class is they fit rules. And I guess depending on how your character spread, how you like want to make your stats, they can excel at different things and not excel at other things. But everyone should be able to cover each other's weaknesses if you have a well-rounded party. If you went into it and it's like everybody from levels 1 to 2, 4, you have your patronage, and then when everyone decides at level 5, what's your path going to be? If everyone decides to be physical DPS, you're going to have a very attack-heavy party, but you're going to have 0 healing and you're going to have 0 damage absorption. So it's going to kind of be a free-for-all. It's like whoever can deal the most damage first.
Exactly.
On the other hand, if you do just like straight up a bunch of healing, or like healing and tank, like combat encounters will either take forever, or the damage output against the party is going to be too much to be able to keep up with because you're not able to take down whatever you're fighting.
Exactly. So
So
I agree. I definitely think that's the thing. So long story short, no one's as powerful. Zill's a freaking good tank. Luxali is a really good healer. Belbin and I are pretty good at attacking, and then Thordane's real good outside of battle, and a little bit okay in battle too. So,
well, and also too, like when we actually very first started Everlast as a D&D campaign, there was definitely a tier system. I could tell you that, and it was mostly because what I didn't have everyone do like certain take on certain statistics and then add modifiers based on like their character building. I basically had everyone roll their stats. And so, like, for example, Luxalia was by far overpowered compared to everyone else in the party. Like, it wasn't even close. Really high stats, all that kind of stuff. And because she was also a cleric and she gained access to all kinds of stuff, what she ended up doing, I remember there was literally one combat encounter where it was like 2 ship battles where like they were on the Flortensia, the party, and there was this like literally enemy ship full of guys that were coming after him, and she just decided to just sink the whole ship.
Yep. She just used water and just sunk it.
And I was just like, all right, well, based on like what all this says, like that's true. You can sink the ship. And so like, and I'm sure it's fun to feel overpowered, but you just completely ruined a combat encounter for everybody to be able to do. Yes, you kind of saved the day, but you're really overpowered. And then also like you have various things that are because she was a cleric, she had magic, and magic in D&D is super duper overpowered. If every class to some degree, not every class, but a lot of classes use magic. Where in Everlast, there's this thing called mana, where everybody has access to spiritual energy, regardless of whether you're a knight or a mana sword. Yes, there are certain things, like for example, knight will have like 12 hit points to be able to start with, plus modifiers and that kind of stuff, where a mana sword will only have 8. So they're going to be less bulky, a little bit more dangerous in combat, where you have a bulkier person with higher survival in combat. So there's like small changes like that, but again, they offset each other. I've tried to balance as best as I can.
I will also say, especially like I would say session 1 through 5 of when we very first started Everlast, I would also say Belbin was incredibly overpowered because we didn't have weapons and he punched everything. And so he was doing max damage and he was able to do everything he could with it. Whereas I think for the longest time, I had a glass shard or something, like ridiculous. Like I was doing no damage and Belbin was just taking out hordes of dudes because he could just punch things to death. So I would say if you're going back to D&D days, it was definitely Luxalia and Belbin in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say again, going kind of the last question, but I would say it was Luxalia, Belbin, probably Zill, then Yuki, and then Thordane. Yeah, honestly, Thordane, I felt bad. He just rolled really bad.
John
stats.
just was awful.
He couldn't hit anything.
Yeah, bad stats, but like he also just like couldn't hit water if he fell off a boat with his dice. I don't know what was wrong with his dice for like the 3 months. Like there was a 3-month span where he couldn't roll above a 10. It was ridiculous. And it's just like, oh, poor Thordane.
Yeah, he couldn't do anything. And so, which happens, but higher stats tend to mitigate that a little bit.
Yeah.
So
I agree. Cool. Well, that's a great question. Kyle, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay. Oh, is there a character model for Zill's mouse?
Well, I can show you. We do have chibi art. I guess I'll throw in a little bit of plug for our merch. So one thing that's wonderful about Everlast is it is a obviously a tabletop RPG, but it has a lot of influence from JRPG as well, including an anime style art style. And so we actually have a merch line of all the characters with like chibi arts and stuff like that. So this is Yuki. This is her beautiful, wonderful face, my character. But the one for Zill has a mouse. And so as you can see, it's a cute little round mouse right there, little white mouse. Oftentimes we forget about him. But I guess for that specific art, it does. Also, his character that you have, like the little piece.
Miniature. Like on the very back, if you look, like right at his feet, there's like a tiny little mouse that's there. Yeah, he's there. He like his mouse doesn't do anything for him other than the fact that he's just kind of like a pet that
Just
Zoo
that.
has.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, it's cool. He's there. Actually, one thing I know Max wants to do is we may do something like a little bit of a contest or something a little bit later on, where you guys will actually get the opportunity to name his mouse, because it doesn't actually have a name. So if you want in on that, stay tuned, and we will update you about that.
Exactly.
Okay, next question. It's a lot of questions in one. We can't answer too much about it. I don't know anything about it. I know Kyle will give his 2 cents here and there. But we'll have other characters on. For example, it's obviously going to be Yuki and the Fate Weaver Kyle for the majority of these, but we will in the future have other of the characters on to talk about themselves a little bit more as well. So this one is a long question directed at Luxalia, and this is by the numerable whom. So do we learn more about Luxalia's checkered past later? More interestingly, how did she get out of it? Inner strength to fight her way out, or was there someone instrumental in helping her get away from it? So I know nothing about this, so Kyle, take it.
Okay, I will. Yes, you will. I'm sure eventually. Yeah, I think so. And there might be other people.
We'll come back to that question. How does that sound? When we can actually get Cole on, and maybe, you know what, when we do find out about it, or if we do find out about him, then we can have Cole on to talk about it.
Well, that's part of it too. One of the things that's really difficult in any kind of role-playing game is this idea of metagaming. And so I've really tried to do my best for the players in Everlast to try to be like, don't reveal to other players what you don't want other players to know.
Yeah, I don't know anything about Luxalia. Cole does a good job about that.
So if there's other elements, like the way that a character is their upbringing, that kind of stuff that they don't want revealed, the rest of the characters won't really know, and I think there'll be an actual genuine reaction when certain things come up. Fate Weavers and DMs can do whatever they want for that, but as a party, that's how it is. And so, yes, I know everything about these, but you guys will find out when the rest of the party finds out.
Sounds good. Nice. Okay, Kyle, do you want to take the next one?
Do Glyvins tell dad jokes?
Do they, Kyle? Do Glyvins tell dad jokes?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Belbin's said it 1 or 2. I think Cole has 2. That's all yet.
It all depends on the player and how they play the character. If you have a player that wants to tell dad jokes, then they can. So the Glyvins themselves are based off of Japanese culture, right? Like they're fox people essentially.
Yep.
And so maybe, I don't know, the dad jokes that a Glyvin would say is like a Japanese dad joke, which are very difficult
Japanese
to
slapstick humor. Some of the humor over here in Japan, I'm just like, I look at it, I'm just like, what the heck?
How's that funny?
It's ridiculous. Okay. But like Japanese TV shows, oh my gosh. So maybe like that. Although I feel like definitely with Cole, like being my brother, like he is a goof. Yeah. And so like as Luxalia, I'm sure dad jokes are all the time thing, because for him, dad jokes are an all the time thing. So
yes, why not?
Yeah.
Why not? All right, great. Next question. If all the characters had a favorite / least favorite dish, what would they be? Again, I actually haven't really looked into this too much. Kyle, are there any specific dishes that are famous in the town of Flamongolith? Because I'm sure that's what Yuki's favorite dish would be. I'm sure for all of the characters themselves, it would be something that reminds them of home, right? Yes. Maybe, potentially.
I think of something hearty, like a nice stew. Something for like a cold climate. Although, I don't know. I mean, for Yuki, I have no idea. Yeah. I mean, it's... So what Draken culture, especially Northern Draken culture, is supposed to revolve around is actually a lot of Norse stuff. So if you a good example is looking at something like Skyrim and seeing what the Nords do, their kind of culture and everything. In Skyrim with the Nords, Elder Scrolls stuff. So if you could think of a food that they have, I don't know.
Be delicious. She's not huge into alcohol. She does drink alcohol, but she's not huge into it. She didn't grow up with it all that much, so she's not a big drinker. But she does like to eat. I will say she's not picky. One thing about Draken culture as well is, especially Silver Draken culture, you respect just Draken culture in general, but Silver Draken too. You respect your elders and you respect the people who raise you and grow up. So I'm assuming growing up, Yuki was exactly like that. She was just... if she was told to eat something, she ate it. So she's not picky, and she is fine with pretty much everything. She does also like elven food, for reasons not yet said. If you, again, subscribe to Patreon, you may get glimpses here and there of some of those. But none of you guys know now. Maybe you'll find out in the future. So
Exactly.
yeah.
I would say for Belbin, probably everything. I don't think he's really picky. He hasn't really mentioned anything about him being really
He just
picky.
likes alcohol, but he'll eat anything.
Yeah, alcohol. Thordane, I don't know about his like eating food habits. Probably like some kind of like game, wild game. I don't know, but he is a beer guy. He is not so much a wine guy.
Yeah.
So like as a beer guy for an elf, that's interesting. Usually they tend to in Everlast be more into their finer wines and like that kind of.
Well, he's also a hardy out on the road kind of guy, Thordane.
True,
He's
true.
not...
Like it frequents taverns where probably ale is easier to come by.
Exactly.
And then I would say Zill. We've actually seen this. He loves everything.
Everything.
Literally coming from nothing and like having these luxurious meals. We saw in session 1 him just chowing down on a meal in Domon Onsen.
Yep.
To the point where like he just like is completely baffled, or not even baffled. He just ignores everything that's going on. Like that's like not a big deal. So, and then Luxalia. I don't know. Japanese food.
Sushi.
I don't know. Sushi.
That'd be another good question to ask her. I don't know. Probably again, just something that reminds you of home, I guess.
Exactly.
So, great. Is it my turn? Your turn for the next one?
My turn.
Okay.
Okay, this is a good one. I actually really like this. One. And yeah, I'll start off with you, Dane. But everyone's favorite JRPG or any RPG, and other than JRPGs, what are folks' others' favorite games to play?
All right. Well, those of you who have followed Fantasy Forge Studios for a bit, not just our Everlast streaming, you know the games that I like to play. I am the main personality outside of Everlast, so I do stream during the week. And I mainly play Zelda games. I'm a huge Legend of Zelda fan. We're currently doing some Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild Master Mode, which is a great time. But also a lot of Nintendo RPGs and JRPGs. So I'm a huge fan of, what's it called? I'm a huge fan of Octopath Traveler. Kyle got me hooked onto that. It's a great game. Obviously, I enjoy JRPGs that are Final Fantasy-esque. I'll let Kyle talk about that a little bit more. I'm huge into app games. One in particular that I play a lot is a game called Grand Blue Fantasy, and it's a really popular app game here in Japan.
Oh man, we played it since college.
Since college, which I guess at this point, that's been like 7 years. It's ridiculous. I can't believe. I feel old.
We're old.
I feel old. But yeah, so we were Grand Blue Fantasy, and again, it is a Final Fantasy-esque type game, but definitely like Japanese, gacha style. And so I love those kind of games. And I mean, Kyle and I have very similar tastes in games. So Kyle, take on the rest of them. What other games do you like?
Anything that's Square Enix, and this has been something from, you know, growing up. Again, Zelda. But the Square Enix stuff, Final Fantasy, Octopath Traveler. I'm excited to actually start playing Triangle Strategy. I'm a married man, so it makes it difficult to play games. I love Animal Crossing. The newest one, so good. I'm sure if you guys watch Dane streams, you'll see Kyle playing Animal Crossing. Because I like to play Animal Crossing casually, especially with my wife. Pokemon, love Pokemon. That's technically an RPG, so Pokemon is huge. Love it. And then let's see other things like again just JRPGs, Golden Sun, things like Ulterior Ryza. I don't know. Pretty much any JRPG under the sun. I also play app games as well. So yeah, Fire Emblem is a really good one. So Fire Emblem Heroes, the app game, or Fire Emblem Three Houses, or any of the Fire Emblem games, like super good.
Yeah.
That covers them kind of.
Yeah.
But...
I mean, I know Kyle's actually the one who really got me into JRPGs themselves. I mean, growing up for myself, I didn't play games as much as Kyle did in my free time. I always liked watching him play. And so the one game in particular, there's lots of them, but 2 games in particular were Skyrim when we were in high school, as well as Final Fantasy 13, in particular Final Fantasy 13 Part 1. Oh man, just
So good.
coming back from playing like baseball, we were huge into sports, so we did all that kind of stuff. And just like me in my basement, sleeping on the couch and just listening to the beautiful soundtrack of Final Fantasy as Kyle just like sat on the couch and played it.
I'm gonna tell you guys, you're gonna hate. A lot of people hate on Final Fantasy 13, 1 and 2.
So good.
So good.
Love them.
You don't know what you're missing. It's so good.
And how can we forget Final Fantasy 14?
Yes.
How can we forget? We do play Final Fantasy 14, the MMORPG. Super fun, super good. I'm
So
still
good.
very consistent with it, so I do try to log in at least a couple times a week, which is good. I know, Kyle, for you it's difficult because of married life and stuff like that.
Yes.
But
And my PlayStation's back in Colorado, so
well, there you go.
it makes it difficult.
But yeah, Final Fantasy. Yeah, I agree. It's a good question. We'll have to ask some of the other guys again. If we have them on, then we'll definitely ask them. So
Yeah.
great. Next question. What would Thordain's favorite book be in our world?
I have an answer to this.
Okay.
I have an answer to this, and it's partially based off of like what I know of Jonathan. Like growing up, I've known Jonathan since I was kindergarten.
Yep.
Dane and I.
Same here. Yep.
So like we've known actually pretty much all of these guys we've known our entire lives, with like, the exception of Connor. Connor's definitely one of our newer friends, but Jonathan we've known since kindergarten. And one book that I think that he would absolutely love, Thordain would in this world, is a book that Jonathan really likes. It's called Hatchet. It's one of your it's older. It came out in like the early 2000s, but it was a survival book. Basically, this guy out in the wilderness surviving alone with a hatchet. It became a series, I believe, but yeah, Thordain would love that. Just this idea of surviving on the land and figuring out how to, survive a winter in the mountains. With
I
moose.
agree. I think that's a great one. I know, maybe not necessarily Thordain, because again, I don't necessarily know Thordain's taste in particular. Only John and really Kyle know that. However, I can comment on Jonathan's books that he likes. At least growing up, one series I know he really liked, which is kind of a interesting series when I really think back to it, was a series called the Redwall series. I know one of the books was called Redwall. I know one of them was called like Lord Brocktree. But basically what it is, think Lord of the Rings or like Game of Thrones, whereas like it's like knights, it's in medieval setting, but they're all like woodland creatures, so like badgers and mice and squirrels and like that kind of stuff. And it's rabbits. It's really cool. Like it's a really kind of cool series. It's vaguely like Wind in the Willows. Those of you, that's more of a popular book. I'm sure some of you guys have heard of. They're anthropomorphized versions of animals who take on these medieval characteristics. But I mean, Jonathan was also a huge fan of like Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis. I think he still is. I don't know necessarily what he reads nowadays, but at least growing up, I know those were some of his favorite books and stuff. So
Absolutely.
Sweet. Great. All right. I guess.
Last question.
Podcast has got to end at some point, guys.
Yeah.
But this is a great last question to end on. Is there a schedule for Everlast streams posted somewhere? Kyle, is there a schedule for Everlast streams posted somewhere?
Oh yeah, guys, go to our website.
Yeah, we have a website.
FantasyForgeStudios.com. I think that's what it is. Exactly verbatim, something like that.
Yep.
Yeah, it's everything's posted there. On the front page, there is a calendar part of the way down. That allows you to basically see all of the Everlast and that kind of stuff streams, where we try to update it as regularly as possible, and especially for Everlast, I try to update it months in advance.
Exactly, months in advance.
So it's something to, again, look forward to, make sure you write on your calendar so you don't miss. We would love for you guys to join us every time. Obviously, again, if you can't see our live streams on Twitch, we always upload the videos that we have onto the Fantasy Forge YouTube page.
Yep. And also it's also going to be the suggested video on our website, which is, again, links to our YouTube page. So either way, you're going to YouTube. But yeah, since this podcast is going up onto YouTube and then eventually in the future, SoundCloud as well, all the links for the website, the Patreon, merch, anything, Twitch channel will be posted in the description, and any of our, and all of that is also posted on our Twitch channel in the About section. So all those links are there. You guys can feel free to follow those. But yeah, our schedule is very up to date, and in theory, how it goes is every second and third Saturday of every month, we will be doing Everlast, unless there's some sort of big holiday, something happens as far as like religiously goes, where just the vast majority of us can't be there, kind of thing. But again, we know that a ton of time in advance, but it's gonna be mainly be the second and third Saturday of every month for the sessions, and then the fourth Saturday is gonna be the uploading of the podcast. So the week after the third session, or the second session, I guess. Anything else?
I think that'll do it.
All right. Well, let's talk really quickly before we head out about a couple things. So our next session will be June 11th, and that will be session 4. So be there or be square. We do start streaming at 8:30. No, 8:30 Pacific Standard Time. I know it's the morning, but it's the best time that works out for everyone. Kyle and I live in Japan, but the rest of our party members live in America. So
yeah. So FYI, Dane and I are up streaming at 12:30 midnight.
Yep, midnight.
So a lot of the
4 a.m.
a lot of the times we don't finish until 4 a.m. So this is for you guys. We're accommodating your time.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yes.
No, but yeah, it is. That's the time that just works best for everyone. And also it's just a great time for our European friends. It's like the afternoon. For some of our Asian friends and people who live maybe closer to the Europe side of Asia, it's like the evening. Unfortunately for my Australian and New Zealand friends, it's the middle of the night. However, you can always catch it on YouTube, which we upload, so it's no problem.
Exactly.
So we have that, and then obviously the week after that, I don't know what the specific date of that is. The 18th, I want to say. The 18th.
Yeah, that
will
sounds
be
right.
will be session 5, and then the podcast afterwards. We also do have a merch store, which we talked about, and we do have a Patreon. So again, this game is a self-funded game, and again, we rely a lot on you guys to be able to help us with that. Of course, if you can't give monetarily, the best thing you can do is comment on our YouTube video, share our Twitch, follow our Twitch stream, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and share. And if you can share Everlast with just one other person, it drastically expands the community, and we can bring wonderful entertainment to everyone. And so if you can't give financially, that's the best way you can help support us here at Everlast, is not only just being here and partaking in this wonderful adventure along with us, but sharing it with a friend and commenting and being interactive with it. Again, we try to pride ourselves with Everlast being interactive, so you guys have a role in the game as well.
Speaking of which,
Kyle, do you want to talk about the Patreon?
We have a Patreon. So there's an Everlast Patreon that you can subscribe to. Currently, right now, we have 2 levels. We have a $5 level and a $10 level. I know it's a little amount, but it's a monthly thing, and every single penny matters. Yes. Truly, it really helps with the creation of this game and everything going forward. But the perks that you get at each of these levels, at the $5 level, during the actual live stream of Everlast on the second and third Saturdays of every month, you can basically provide the players hope. Hope is a really intense, important thing, which allows them essentially to be able to either use it to pass some kind of check or use it to be able to re-roll it's basically advantage in D&D. But basically, if you are following or subscribe to the $5 level, at any point during the stream, you just have to say the player's name and then hope. And then I make sure I keep track of all the people that provide hope. And once a month, you can provide 1 hope to anyone on stream. Yep. You can intercede on behalf of fate to be able to allow them to potentially roll better and survive another day. At the $10 level, you can do that twice a month. So you get 2 of those that you're able to do. So even better. And additionally, you will gain access to the audio files, most of the audio files, because some of them were either corrupted or lost, of the previous adventures of Eklos Eos before the streamed adventure. So if you want to know more, and these sessions are long, so we usually try to stream on Twitch for about 2.5 hours. Which again is pretty short for a D&D session, but our D&D sessions that we did before we actually implemented the Everlast everything lasted 3 to sometimes 6 hours. crazy. So it's a lot of content that you guys will be able to have.
Well worth it, in my opinion. Like, for $10, it's like more than double the content that you'll be getting for Everlast. So it's a really good price for sure. I agree with that. Also, we have a merch store, and again, everything's linked. Again, the merch store will be linked in the about section. But we got all kinds of different characters stuff. For example, again, we have adorable decals you can do. We have t-shirts with each of the characters. Actually, I know Zill, Max, myself for Yuki, and then Cole for Luxalia, we each have t-shirts with our characters on them. You guys can buy the same exact one. They even have the Everlast on the shoulder, because they're the official merchandise for Everlast for now. Also, we have Everlast logo merchandise as well, so like the logo that you see above our heads right now, you can buy exclusive merch with that.
I have the game pad, so you can either use it as a play mat for any card games that you have, or you can use it as, I use it as a desk mat.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, amazing quality. I have a t-shirt, I have the stickers, all that kind of fun stuff. So
and I would say, honestly, especially for like merch itself, it's actually very decently priced. I know there's a lot of merch stores that like sell things for an arm and a leg, but this is decently priced. You're not having to spend a ton of money on it. It's a great way to be able to support your character, and all proceeds for both the Patreon and the merch store go into the creation of Everlast itself. So it's a way for you to help us financially support Everlast. And so those are the two main best ways. Again, we always do appreciate the subscriptions and the bits and stuff on Twitch, as well as you just sharing. And if you want to donate, feel free to do so as well. There is a donate button on the Twitch page. And again, everything's linked in the about section. I think that's it, Kyle. Do you have anything else that you want to leave us on?
May allow me to guide all of you, because honestly, during these times, during these days, it's always amazing to be able to have God on your side.
I agree. Well, thank you everyone for listening to podcast number 2 of the Everlast Adventures, and we will catch you next month, in the month of June, on the 4th weekend for episode 3. So, see you then. Bye, everyone.
God bless. Bye.